human boy found an alien girl alone at home and made a choice that changed everything. It was a quiet afternoon in a small suburban town. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, but not too much about anyone. The sun shone gently over the rows of neat houses, casting long shadows across the empty streets. In one of these houses lived a boy named Armand. He was just 16, with messy brown hair and eyes that always seemed to be watching, noticing things most people ignored. He was an ordinary boy in most ways, shy and careful, spending more time reading books and tinkering with old gadgets than hanging out with friends. But that afternoon, his ordinary life was about to change forever. Armand had come home earlier than usual. His school had let out unexpectedly due to a sudden assembly, and he found himself walking the familiar path toward his small house, feeling a little bored and restless. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was silent, just as he had left it in the morning. But something felt off. At first it was subtle. A soft sound, almost like a whisper, came from the living room. Armand paused, listening. The sound stopped. He shook his head, thinking it was just the wind playing tricks on him. He kicked off his shoes and moved toward the kitchen, hoping to grab a snack. That's when he noticed a small shadow flickering across the corner of his eye. Armand froze. His heart started to beat faster. There shouldn't have been anyone in the house. His parents were at work, and his older sister was at college. He took a careful step forward, then another. The sound came again, this time a faint shuffle, like someone moving quietly across the floor. He held his breath and peeked around the corner of the hallway. That's when he saw her. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, her knees pulled to her chest. She looked no older than 12, but there was something about her that was impossible to describe. Her skin had a pale, almost glowing quality. Her eyes were large and bright, reflecting colors that Armand had never seen before. Her hair was silver, shimmering softly in the sunlight that filtered through the window. She didn't look dangerous. She looked scared, terrified even. For a moment, Armand could only stare. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Am I dreaming? Did someone play a prank on me? But the way she blinked, slowly and carefully, and the way she hugged her knees, told him this was real. She was real. Hey, he said softly, his voice trembling. Are you okay? The girl flinched at his voice, her body shrinking even further into herself. She didn't respond, not with words. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him. Her eyes were curious but wary, like a wild animal trying to understand if he was a threat. Armand swallowed hard. He wanted to step back, to run, to call someone, but he couldn't. Something in her eyes held him there, made him pause. He realized she wasn't dangerous. She was just... Lossie knelt down, keeping his distance, and tried again. I'm Armand. My name is Armand. You. You don't have to be scared. Slowly, cautiously, the girl's shoulders relaxed a little. She didn't speak, but she didn't move away either. Her gaze never left his face. It was then that Armand noticed something else: her hands. They were delicate, almost fragile, with long fingers that seemed to shimmer like the tips of glass. He felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. Where are your parents? He asked, though he didn't expect an answer. The girl shook her head slightly, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. She was alone. Armand's heart sank. How had she ended up in his house? Why was she here? Questions swirled in his mind, but there were no answers. He knew one thing for sure: he couldn't just leave her there. He took a careful step closer and held out his hand. Not to touch her, but to show that he meant no harm. It's okay, he said again. You can trust me. I won't hurt you. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, she moved her hand, reaching out to his. The skin of her fingers was cool, almost electric, and Armand felt a strange shiver run through him. She didn't say anything, but her gesture was enough. She was trusting him, at least a little. Armand guided her gently to the sofa, keeping a respectful distance. He could see that she was hungry, tired, and confused. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the furniture, the walls, the pictures on the shelves. She had never seen anything like this before. It was clear she didn't belong here or anywhere on earth. He moved to the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water, then a small piece of bread. When he returned, she looked at the food with wide eyes, then hesitated. Armand smiled softly. "It's okay. You can eat." Slowly, she took the bread, nibbling at it carefully. Every bite was cautious, almost as if she had never eaten before. Armand watched her, a mix of wonder and concern filling his chest. He didn't know what she was or where she had come from, but he knew he had to protect her. The afternoon passed quietly. Armand tried to make her feel safe, talking softly, moving slowly, and avoiding sudden gestures. He learned small things about her. She didn't speak his language, but she understood some words. She could mimic simple gestures, and her eyes seemed to understand emotions more than words ever could. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the windows, Armand realized something important. He couldn't go to anyone for help, not yet. No one would believe him, and more importantly, no one would understand her. She was alone in a world that didn't know she existed, and it was up to him to keep her safe. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, but it didn't scare him away. Instead, it sparked something deep inside, a sense of purpose, a need to do the right thing. He realized that his life, which had always been quiet and predictable, had just changed forever. Something extraordinary had entered it, and there was no going back. By the time night fell, Armand had made a silent promise. He would protect her. He would keep her safe. No matter what it took, he wouldn't let her face this strange, confusing world alone. And as he sat across from her, watching her finally relax a little and even smile faintly, he understood something he had never truly believed before. Sometimes life didn't follow the rules. Sometimes it surprised you, and sometimes the most unexpected moments could become the most important ones of your life. That night, the house was quiet again, but it was different now. The ordinary, predictable life Armand had known had ended. In its place, a new story had begun, one that would test his courage, his heart, and the very limits of what he thought was possible. And it all started with a single, quiet discovery: a girl, alone, lost, and unlike anyone he had ever met. The next morning, Armand woke up to the soft light of dawn spilling through his bedroom window. The house was quiet, but not empty. He could hear the faint sound of movement from the living room, the small, careful shuffle of someone trying not to be noticed. He knew immediately it was her. He got out of bed slowly, careful not to make any noise. His mind raced with questions. Who was she really? Where had she come from? And most importantly, what should he do next? The events of the previous afternoon had left him shaken, but also strangely determined. He couldn't turn away from her now, not after seeing her so scared and alone. Armand tiptoed into the living room. The girl was sitting on the sofa, knees tucked under her chin, staring at the floor. She had not moved much since last night. Her silver hair fell softly around her face, and her large eyes, though full of curiosity, were still wary. "Good morning," Armand said softly, sitting down on the opposite end of the sofa. "Did you sleep okay?" The girl didn't answer. She simply lifted her head slightly and nodded, as if acknowledging him without fully trusting that it was safe. Her silence made Armand feel a mixture of frustration and empathy. He wanted to communicate with her, but words didn't seem to work. She was not human, and he had to find another way. He decided to observe her carefully. Every small movement, every gesture, told him something about her state of mind. She flinched at sudden sounds, avoided direct eye contact at first, and seemed fascinated by ordinary objects around the house. A spoon made her tilt her head curiously. The reflection in a mirror made her touch it softly with her fingers. Even the small plants on the windowsill drew her attention. Armand realized she was learning. Slowly, she was trying to understand this world, one small detail at a time. It reminded him of a baby learning to walk or a young animal learning to survive. He felt a strange sense of responsibility settle deep in his chest. He wasn't just a boy in his quiet life anymore. He was a protector, a guide, and possibly the only person she could trust. Breakfast was a careful affair. Armand brought her a plate with simple food, bread, fruit, and water. She stared at it for a long moment, touching each piece lightly before taking a small bite. Her movements were delicate, almost reverent, as if she had never eaten like this before. "You don't have to be afraid," Armand said gently. "This is your safe place. For now." She looked at him again, her large eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Gratitude? Relief? Perhaps both. But just as quickly, she looked away, back at the plate, as if afraid that trust could disappear too quickly. After breakfast, Armand spent the day quietly watching her, making sure she felt safe while trying to figure out what to do next. He noticed things that were unusual about her, small details that no one else could understand. Her skin seemed to shimmer slightly in the light, and when she moved, it was with an elegance that was almost unreal. But despite these differences, there was a softness to her, vulnerability that made him feel connected to her. He also noticed her fear. She was careful not to touch anything too quickly, and she often backed away from him when he tried to get too close. Her eyes darted toward the doors and windows constantly, as if she was waiting for someone or something to appear. It was clear she had been through something frightening, and Armand knew he had to be patient. Trust could not be forced. Throughout the day, he began experimenting with ways to communicate. He drew pictures on paper, showing her simple shapes and objects, and pointed to them as he said their names. She watched him intently, sometimes copying the shapes with her own hand. Slowly, small gestures became a shared language between them. A nod could mean yes, a shake of her head could mean no, a soft smile could mean she was comfortable. Armand also learned to read her emotions in subtle ways. When she was nervous, her hands trembled slightly. When she was curious, her eyes sparkled and her head tilted. When she was sad, she hugged herself tightly and looked at the floor. Each of these signals helped him understand her better, even when words failed. By late afternoon, Armand decided to show her the outside world, at least from the safety of his backyard. He opened the sliding door carefully, and the girl stepped out hesitantly. She paused at the threshold, her silver hair catching the sunlight. She crouched low, sniffing the air like an animal unfamiliar with the scent of grass and flowers. "It's okay," Armand said softly. "Nothing can hurt you here." "Not while I'm around?" She looked up at him and slowly stepped onto the grass. Every movement was cautious, but with each small step, she grew braver. Armand felt a warmth in his chest as he watched her explore. It was a small victory, but it was significant. She was beginning to trust him, to believe that this strange human could be a friend. That evening, as the sky turned golden and the first stars appeared, Armand noticed her staring at the horizon. Her large eyes reflected the colors of the sunset, and for a moment she seemed lost in thought. He realized that even in her silence, she was thinking, feeling, and processing this new world. "Do you miss where you came from?" he asked quietly. The girl tilted her head slightly but did not answer. Armand understood. She couldn't speak his language well, and even if she could, she might not have words for the world she had left behind. He felt a pang of sadness for her. She was alone, truly alone, in a place she did not know. That night, Armand prepared a small corner of his room for her. He placed a soft blanket on the floor, a few pillows, and a small lamp to keep the shadows away. She hesitated at first, then slowly settled down, curling into herself as if she were trying to make the space her own. Armand watched her from across the room, feeling a mix of relief and responsibility. He knew he couldn't leave her, not now, not ever. Sleep came slowly. Armand lay in his bed, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing from the corner. He thought about what the next days might bring. How would he explain her to the world? Could he even do that? The questions were endless. But one thought was clear in his mind. He had made a choice. He would protect her, no matter the cost. The next morning, the routine began again. Armand brought her food, observed her carefully, and found small ways to help her feel safe. He noticed how she reacted to light, sound, and even temperature. Every small detail mattered. It was as if he was learning a new language of emotions, gestures, and signs. And she was teaching it to him without words. By the end of the week, a subtle bond had formed. She would sometimes follow him quietly as he moved around the house, mimicking small actions or simply watching him work on his gadgets. He began to feel her presence as comforting, even necessary. In turn, she seemed to look for him. Seeking reassurance and safety in his quiet company, Armin also began to notice something else: her intelligence. She could figure out simple puzzles he presented. She remembered instructions. And she even began experimenting with small objects, trying to understand how things worked. It was clear she was not just a frightened child. She was curious, clever, and resourceful. One afternoon, he saw her pick up one of his old tools and examine it carefully. He held his breath, expecting her to drop it or break it, but she handled it with care. Then she mimicked the movements he had shown her earlier, trying to make it work. He realized she was learning from him in a way that was faster than any human child he had ever known. By the time night fell again, Armin felt both exhausted and exhilarated. This was not how he had imagined his life, but it was undeniably real. Every small action, every glance, every silent moment of understanding between them was a step toward something larger, connection that defied explanation but felt as natural as breathing. As he turned off his bedside lamp, he looked toward her corner. She was sleeping peacefully, a rare moment of calm on her delicate face. Armin knew that their journey had just begun. There were challenges ahead, dangers he could not yet see, and choices he would have to make. But for now, he allowed himself a small sense of hope. He realized that sometimes understanding could grow without words, and trust could form without promises. In this quiet, ordinary house, something extraordinary was happening. And as the boy drifted into sleep, he felt a deep, unshakable certainty. He would not let anything harm her. Not now, not ever. Days passed, and the quiet house became a little less ordinary, even though no one outside would have noticed. Armin continued his routine with care, always keeping the girl's presence a secret. He had begun thinking of her as more than just a stranger. She had become a companion, someone whose well-being now mattered as much as his own. The alien girl, whom he had started calling Luma in his mind because it reminded him of light, was slowly growing accustomed to life in his house. She was still shy and cautious, but she began to explore more freely, touching objects, moving from room to room, and even trying simple gestures that mimicked human actions. Her trust in Armin was evident in the way she followed him quietly when he moved through the house. Pausing to watch him with wide, intelligent eyes, Armin noticed every detail. The way her fingers trembled when she was nervous, the soft hum she made when she was content, almost like a whisper of music. The way her eyes seemed to absorb light and color from everything around her, reflecting her curiosity. He realized that every small action was a message, a form of communication he was only beginning to understand. One afternoon, as Armin worked on an old radio he had found in the attic, Luma climbed up the stairs to watch him. He looked up and smiled gently. "Do you want to try?" he asked, pointing to a screwdriver. She tilted her head, unsure, but slowly extended her delicate hand toward the tool. Armin guided her fingers, showing her how to hold it and turn the screws. She mimicked his movements carefully, her large eyes focused and serious. When she succeeded, however small the accomplishment, a faint smile appeared on her face. Armin couldn't help but smile back. It was a victory of trust and understanding. Their days fell into a quiet rhythm. Armin would attend school and come home, while Luma stayed in the house, learning and observing. He started leaving small notes and simple symbols to communicate with her when he was gone. For instance, a drawing of a glass of water meant drink. A plate of food meant eat, and a small house meant stay here. She learned quickly. Following the notes with careful precision, it wasn't long before Armin noticed that Luma wasn't just intelligent, she was deeply aware. She seemed to understand emotions, not just actions. When he was worried or upset, she would come close, sometimes placing her small hand near his in a silent gesture of comfort. When she was curious or excited, she would bounce lightly on the balls of her feet, her hair shimmering like sunlight on water. These moments were simple, but they created a bond stronger than anything Armand had experienced with other people his age. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with orange and pink, Armand decided to take Luma to the backyard again. He wanted to show her a tree he had climbed as a child, a place he had always felt safe. Luma hesitated at the door, as she always did, but after a moment, she stepped out. The grass felt strange under her bare feet, and she looked down at it curiously, touching it lightly with her fingertips. Armand smiled and knelt beside her. "It's okay," he said softly. "Nothing will hurt you here." She looked at him, her large eyes filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Then slowly she reached out her hand. Armand held it gently, guiding her toward the tree. She watched him climb first, her head tilting as if trying to understand the mechanics of it. Then, with careful determination, she attempted to climb herself, using her long limbs in a way that was both awkward and graceful. Armand held his breath, ready to catch her if she fell. But she made it to the first branch, her face lighting up with pride. That small victory created a new level of trust between them. Luma began to imitate more of Armand's actions, learning from observation. She helped him tidy up the house in her own way, stacking items carefully or placing objects where he pointed. She even began to mimic facial expressions, smiling when he smiled, frowning when he frowned. Armand realized that she wasn't just learning about the world, she was learning about human behavior, about connection, about emotion. Despite their growing closeness, fear remained a constant companion. Luma still flinched at sudden noises, still hesitated when she saw a stranger through the window, and still looked toward the doors as if expecting danger. Armand understood that her past, whatever it had been, was not something she could forget easily. She had been alone for a reason, and the shadows of that past lingered in her cautious movements. Armand himself began to change. He felt more responsible than ever, but also more alive. His small, ordinary life had transformed into something extraordinary. He thought constantly about her safety, about what the world might do if it discovered her, and about the kind of person he wanted to be. Every decision, every small gesture was made with her in mind. One afternoon, he tried a new method to communicate. He found a notebook and drew simple pictures, representing everyday objects and activities. He pointed to a drawing and said the word aloud, then watched as Luma copied the symbol and pointed back to the object. It was slow work, but it was a breakthrough. They were creating a shared understanding. A language built not just of words, but of gestures, symbols, and trust. At night, Armand would sit quietly while Luma explored her corner of the room. She had learned to make a little nest from blankets and pillows, arranging them just so. Sometimes she would pick up a small object, a pen, a book, a toy, and examine it with careful fascination. Armand realized that her curiosity was boundless, and it reminded him that there was so much more about her he did not yet understand. As days turned into weeks, the bond between them deepened further. Luma began to anticipate his actions, moving in harmony with him, responding to his unspoken cues. When he brought food, she would already be near, ready to eat. When he returned from school, she would appear at the window or door, her large eyes scanning for him. Armand found comfort in these small signs. They were proof that trust was growing, proof that they were no longer two strangers in the same house, but companions. Partners in a secret world they shared. One rainy afternoon, the storm outside made the house feel isolated and tense. Luma was nervous, trembling at the sound of thunder and the flash of lightning. Armand knelt beside her and held her hand, speaking softly. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe here. Nothing can hurt you while I'm around." Her fingers pressed against his, and for the first time, she allowed herself to relax fully. The storm passed, and with it, a barrier between them seemed to dissolve. Armand realized that their bond was not just about trust or learning. It was about care, about understanding each other in a way that no words could fully express. Even as their connection grew, Armand knew that their situation was fragile. He had no idea how long they could remain hidden, no idea what dangers might come if anyone discovered her. But for now, he focused on the present, on the small moments that mattered, teaching her, protecting her, sharing the quiet house together. By the end of the week, A simple routine had formed. Mornings were spent observing and learning, afternoons exploring and experimenting. Evenings communicating through gestures and drawings, and nights sharing the quiet comfort of proximity without words. Each day brought new discoveries, new challenges, and new moments of connection. Armin often thought about the world outside, but he knew that the world could wait. For Luma, and for him, the most important thing was here, in this house, this shared space where trust and understanding had begun to grow. He realized that this bond, though fragile, was real, and it was powerful. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with soft purples and golds, Armin sat on the floor near Luma. She had learned to mimic his actions so closely that it almost felt like they were in perfect sync. He smiled, feeling a sense of calm he had never experienced before. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we'll try something new. You'll see more of the backyard. I'll show you the little creek behind the trees. It's safe, I promise." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. Then she nodded. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. It meant she trusted him enough to follow him, to take steps into the unknown with him as a guide. Armin felt a swell of emotion. This was what it meant to care for someone, to guide, protect, and learn from each other. Their journey had only just begun, but already it had changed him. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers they might face, the bond they were building in secrecy was strong enough to face them together. And as the first stars appeared in the night sky, Armin and Luma sat quietly, sharing the silence. Words were unnecessary. Their trust, their understanding, their growing friendship spoke louder than any language could. In that quiet, ordinary house, something extraordinary was happening, something that would shape both of their lives forever. The days passed quietly at first, but Armin knew it couldn't last forever. Living with Luma in secrecy had taught him many things about trust, courage, and the fragile beauty of their bond, but it had also taught him that the world outside could be unpredictable and dangerous. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing heavier on his shoulders every day. Luma was not like anyone he had ever met, and her safety depended entirely on his decisions. It started with small signs. The mail carrier had lingered at the gate, staring longer than usual at the house. A neighbor, curious and chatty, had stopped by, asking strange questions about the family's routines. Armin had grown skilled at deflecting these inquiries, but each one reminded him that their secret was vulnerable. One small mistake could reveal everything. Then there were the strange lights. One evening, as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Armin noticed unusual flashes in the distance beyond the trees behind his house. At first he thought it was a reflection or a passing vehicle. But as the lights persisted, moving slowly yet deliberately, he realized that they were watching, tracking. A chill ran down his spine. Luma's presence was no longer just a private secret. It had drawn attention he could not yet understand. He looked at her, sitting quietly on the sofa, her silver hair glowing softly in the fading light. She sensed his unease and moved closer, resting her small hand gently against his. Armin's heart ached. How could he explain danger to someone who had never experienced fear in the human sense? How could he prepare her for a world that might never forgive her presence? The choice he faced was no longer theoretical. He could either try to protect her, risking everything, their safety, their freedom, perhaps even their lives, or he could give her up, surrendering her to forces he didn't understand but which might take her far away from him forever. The thought alone made him sick with worry. That night, he sat in his room, staring at the ceiling. Luma had settled in her corner, sleeping fitfully. He could see the tension in her small body, even in rest. He whispered softly to himself, trying to find clarity. "I have to protect her. I can't let anything happen to her. But what if I fail?" Sleep came fitfully. Armin dreamed of being caught, of people coming into the house with stern faces and bright lights. He dreamed of Luma being taken, of her frightened eyes staring at him as she was led away. And he dreamed of running with her in his arms, trying to hide from a world that was not ready to understand her. The next morning, he resolved to act. He began preparing. He gathered supplies, food, water, blankets, even his small collection of gadgets that might help him if they needed to hide. Every item was chosen with care, every step planned with caution. Luma watched him silently, sensing the urgency in his movements. Though she did not yet understand the reason, Armand tried again to communicate through gestures and simple drawings. He pointed to a small backpack, then to her, then to the door. He mimed carrying her, climbing, hiding. At first, she hesitated, looking uncertain. Then, slowly, she understood that they might need to leave the house at any moment. Her large eyes widened, and she nodded ever so slightly, trusting him completely. As they prepared, a new tension filled the air. Even the small noises, the creak of the floor, the rustle of leaves outside, the distant sound of a car felt amplified. Armand felt his senses sharpen. Every shadow, every flicker of movement, was a potential threat. He realized that life with Luma was no longer just about learning and trust. It was about survival, about making choices that could change everything. The first real test came when a loud knock echoed through the house. Armand froze. Luma crouched low, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the blanket. Armand's heart pounded. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. He had only seconds to decide what to do. He whispered to Luma, "Stay quiet." "Don't move." She nodded, her large eyes wide but calm, trusting him completely. Armand opened the door just a crack, peering out. A man in a uniform stood on the porch, clipboard in hand, asking questions about deliveries and schedules. Armand's mind raced. Any sign of fear, any hesitation, and they could discover Luma. He forced a calm voice. "Oh, I'm sorry. No one's home right now. You can leave the packages on the porch." The man's eyes lingered for a moment, suspicious but unconvinced. Then he nodded and moved on. Armand closed the door slowly, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Luma looked at him, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "See, it's okay. You're safe," he said softly. But deep down, he knew that luck would not protect them forever. Over the next few days, Armand realized that he needed a plan. They couldn't stay hidden in the house indefinitely. He began considering options, moving to a more remote location, finding a safe place where no one would look for them, even leaving the town entirely. Each possibility carried risk, but doing nothing was no longer an option. He also began thinking about the bigger picture. Who was Luma? Where had she come from? And why was she here alone? The questions gnawed at him, but answers were scarce. He realized that understanding her fully might be impossible, but protecting her was not. That was something he could control. That was something he had to do one evening. As the sky turned dark and the first stars appeared, Armand sat with Luma in the living room. He showed her a map he had drawn, marking potential safe routes and hiding spots. He pointed to the symbols, then to her, then to himself, miming the movements they would need to make if danger came. Luma watched carefully, her eyes bright and focused. She began to mimic his gestures, learning the plan, understanding the steps without a single word spoken. It was in that moment that Armand realized something profound. The choice before him was not just about safety. It was about trust, courage, and love. Protecting Luma would require risking everything he knew and everything he had, but giving her up, letting her face the unknown alone, was unthinkable. He could not bear it. The next day brought the first true test of that choice. Armand noticed unusual movement outside the window shadows that did not belong to trees or passing cars. He felt a sudden chill, a warning that the threat he had feared was near. He turned to Luma, who had been quietly observing the same movement. Her small hands reached for his, a silent plea for guidance. Armand's mind raced. They had to move, but where? He grabbed the backpack they had packed, filling it with essentials, and motioned for Luma to follow. She did so without hesitation, trusting him completely. Every step they took through the house, every creak of the floorboard, every glance at the window, was measured and careful. They were moving together as one, united by trust and necessity. Outside, air was cool and heavy with the scent of approaching rain. Armand led her toward the trees behind the house, the shadows blending with their movements. He could hear distant voices calling, and his heart pounded in his chest. He had made the choice to protect her, no matter the danger, and now they were living the consequences of that choice. As they moved through the underbrush, Luma stumbled slightly. Armand caught her, holding her close for a moment to reassure her. She looked up at him, her large eyes full of trust, and he felt a surge of determination. Whatever came next, he would not let her face it alone. They reached a small clearing where the lights from the town were barely visible. Armand paused, looking back toward the house. He knew they might never return. The choice he had made to protect her, to risk everything for her, had already changed his life forever. There was no going back. Luma's small hand gripped his tightly. He could feel her pulse, rapid and full of fear, yet also full of trust. Armand realized that this bond, the quiet, unspoken connection they had built over days and weeks, was stronger than any threat, stronger than any obstacle. They were no longer two strangers in a house. They were partners in survival, allies in a world that did not yet understand them. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Armand whispered softly, "It's okay. We're together. We'll face this together." Luma nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and hope. And in that moment, he understood the truth. Choices define us. Some choices are small, some are monumental. But the choice he had made to protect her, to stand by her side, was the one that would shape not just their lives, but the lives they had yet to live. They moved into the shadows, disappearing into the night, carrying with them the fragile hope that together they could face whatever came next. The life they had known, the quiet, ordinary life, was gone. In its place was something new, something extraordinary. A bond forged in trust, courage, and love. A choice that had changed everything, and a journey that was only just beginning. The night was dark, with rain falling in soft, steady sheets that blurred the lights of the distant town. Armand and Luma moved carefully through the underbrush, silent and alert, guided only by the faint glow of the moon above. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of a dog, the trickle of water from a nearby creek, made Armand's heart race. But through it all, he kept his focus on Luma, her small hand gripping his tightly. She had trusted him completely, and he could not let her down. Hours passed as they navigated the shadows. Armand had planned for this. The backpack he carried held food, water, and other supplies. But survival was about more than just supplies. It was about being cautious, being aware, and understanding that any mistake could put them in danger. He whispered instructions to Luma, pointing to landmarks, guiding her around obstacles, and using small gestures they had practiced together to communicate silently. She followed his lead perfectly, showing a level of understanding that amazed him. Eventually, they reached the small creek behind the trees, just as he had promised her days before. The water glimmered under the moonlight, and Luma paused, staring at it with wide, curious eyes. She knelt at the edge and touched the water gently with her fingers, fascinated by its movement and sound. Armand smiled softly. It was a small moment, but it was enough to remind him why he had made the choice to protect her. These were the moments she could experience because he had chosen courage over fear. But the relief was short-lived. From the distance came voices, sharp and urgent, accompanied by the sound of footsteps crunching through the leaves. Armand froze. Someone had discovered them. He quickly pulled Luma behind a large rock, shielding her from view. She trembled, but she did not make a sound. Her trust in him gave him strength. He listened carefully, trying to figure out who they were. The voices were human, but their tone carried authority and urgency, the kind that made Armand's stomach twist. They were looking for her, and if they found her, he did not know what would happen. He had no choice but to move quickly. Armand whispered, "We have to go, now." Luma nodded, gripping his hand tighter. Together, they slipped quietly along the edge of the creek, moving as fast and carefully as they could. Every step was tense, every sound amplified in their minds. But they kept moving, trusting each other completely, relying on the bond they had built over weeks of quiet understanding. As they reached a small clearing, Armand paused to catch his breath. Luma sat down beside him, her large eyes reflecting both fear and wonder. He looked at her and realized something profound. She was not just a stranger anymore. She was family, in the sense that mattered most, the kind of bond that went beyond words or blood. He had chosen her safety over everything else, and that choice had brought them to this point. They spent the night hidden in the forest, using the natural cover of trees and rocks to remain unseen. Armand shared small bites of food from their backpack, and Luma accepted them quietly. She leaned against him for warmth, a small gesture that spoke volumes. They were alone in the world, yet together, and that was enough to give them courage. Morning came slowly, the pale light filtering through the canopy above. Armand knew they couldn't stay in the forest forever. They needed a safe place, somewhere no one would find them. He remembered an old abandoned cabin his father had once mentioned in stories, a place deep in the woods that few people ever visited. It was risky, but it might be the only option. They set out toward the cabin, moving cautiously and using the trees for cover. Luma's movements were careful and deliberate, showing a level of awareness and intelligence that amazed Armand. He realized that she had learned so much in such a short time, not just about survival, but about trust, patience, and courage. She had become more than a helpless child. She was his equal, his companion, and his responsibility. After hours of careful movement, they finally reached the cabin. It was old and weathered, with moss growing on the roof and vines crawling up the walls. But it offered shelter. Armand pushed the door open slowly, checking inside for signs of danger. The cabin was empty, dusty, and quiet, a perfect place to hide for a while. Inside, they made the space their own. Armand cleared a corner for Luma, placing blankets and pillows for her to rest on. He set up a small area for himself, using supplies from the backpack to make the place livable. Luma explored cautiously, touching the furniture and examining the objects left behind. She seemed fascinated by the simple things humans took for granted, and Armand watched her with a mixture of wonder and affection. Days turned into weeks as they stayed in the cabin. Armand and Luma developed a routine. Mornings were spent gathering water from a nearby stream. Afternoons were for exploring the forest safely, and evenings were for learning and communicating. They continued to develop their secret language of gestures, drawings, and expressions, allowing them to understand each other fully without words. During this time, Armand noticed subtle changes in Luma. She smiled more often, played with small objects, and even began to mimic some human behaviors, like brushing her hair or stacking items neatly. It was clear that she was adapting to life on Earth, learning not just to survive, but to live. And in turn, Armand felt a growing sense of purpose. Protecting her was no longer just an obligation. It had become a central part of his identity, something that gave his life meaning and direction. But safety was never guaranteed. Occasionally they would hear sounds in the distance, voices, engines, or lights moving through the trees. Armand would tense, ready to move at a moment's notice. Luma would look to him, and he would nod reassuringly. Each time, she trusted him completely, and each time, he was reminded of the gravity of his choice. Protecting her was not easy, and it would never be simple. One afternoon, as they rested by the creek, Armand reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about the moment he had found her alone in his house. The initial fear and confusion, and the gradual bond they had built. Every small decision, the choice to speak softly, to offer food, to teach gestures, had led them to this point. And the most important decision of all had been made. He had chosen her safety above all else. That choice had changed everything. Luma looked up at him, her eyes wide and full of trust. She reached out and took his hand in her own. Armand smiled softly. In that simple gesture, he felt a depth of connection he had never experienced before. Words were unnecessary. Their bond was clear in the touch, the shared understanding, and the silent promise that they would face the future together. Time passed, and Armand realized that their life in hiding had taught them both valuable lessons. He had learned patience, courage, and the importance of empathy. Luma had learned trust, human behavior, and the strength of companionship. Together, they had created a world of their own, small but safe, filled with care, understanding, and hope. Eventually, Armand began thinking about the future. They could not remain in the cabin forever. One day, they would have to find a place where they could live openly, or at least more safely, without the constant fear of discovery. But for now, he focused on the present, keeping Luma safe, nurturing their bond, and learning from each other. The future could wait. The present demanded attention, care, and courage. One night, as they sat by the small fire they had built, Luma rested her head against Armand's shoulder. The firelight danced across her silver hair, and he felt a sense of peace that he had not known in years. He realized that the choice he had made to protect her, to risk everything, to put her life above his own, was not just a choice of necessity. It was a choice of the heart, a decision that defined who he was and who he wanted to be. And in that quiet, ordinary cabin, surrounded by the forest and the soft sound of the creek, Armand understood the truth. Life was unpredictable, filled with challenges and dangers that could change in an instant. But the choices he made, especially the ones made out of courage, love, and trust, had the power to shape the future in ways he could never have imagined. They sat together, silent but connected, understanding each other in ways words could never capture. The world outside might never know their story, but that did not matter. What mattered was here and now, the bond they had built, the trust they had nurtured, and the courage they had shown. And as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, Armand looked at Luma and smiled. Their journey was far from over. But one thing was certain: the choice he had made to protect her at all costs had changed everything, for both of them forever.